Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irene. I'm the host here. My guest today is Beth Macdonald Stone. Hi, Beth.
Hi, how are you?
So I'm so happy that the hurricane actually allowed us to meet today because yesterday we weren't sure if it's going to happen.
Yeah, we've still got bottles and buckets of water all over the house. We were expecting to lose power and stuff, but thank goodness it veered to our east and we can resume and we have our electricity today. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about where you are. Tell me.
Okay, yeah. So I'm on a teeny tiny island called Bermuda, which is literally in the middle of the Atlantic. Not to be confused, we're not down in the Caribbean. We're right in the middle of the Atlantic, literally a line, New York, Bermuda, Azores. That's it. So it's a really small island, and we get hurricanes, and this is hurricane season. Yeah.
I mean, when people think about Bermuda, besides the Bermuda Triangle and all the mystery that's associated with that, they're usually thinking it's hot tropical weather, but you have a cool winter there. Like once
We do. Yeah. I mean, I am in a sweater today, but my air conditioner is right there. So yes, no, Bermuda does have a really chilly winter. And so sweaters are perfect, really perfect. Like it's almost colder in our houses than it is outside because of the construction, our architectural construction. Houses are made out of local stone or concrete now. And so they're damp and cold. So sweaters are amazing. And you literally wear them inside and out, which is interesting because when I go to colder climates, and I did grow up in Canada, I'm Canadian Bermudian, I find I wear my pretty sweaters, but then I have to put a coat over it, and that's great for sure. But it's sort of neat here because it is so damp and chilly in the winter. It's your top layer. So it's really your main accessory, really. So which is really fun, I think, for the winter months.
Like how big is knitting culture in Bermuda?
Historically, it was fairly big. We're a British colony. So historically, it was quite big, similar to places elsewhere in the world. My mother was taught by a great aunt. I was taught by my mother. Sweaters were really important because we needed them. Our allegiance to the UK, so Pringles of Scotland and stuff. So the knitting culture has always been here. And the sweater sales, like high-end, unique Shetland, like Pringles of Scotland was always a main distributor in Bermuda, which brought tourists too, because they could buy their beautiful Pringles of Scotland wear. So it's kind of like a British outpost here. But as the world evolves and we get into the more modern culture, you don't see many knitters. There's only probably a couple handfuls of us on the island.
How about like after COVID? Because like COVID was wonderful for knitting worldwide.
Wasn't it great?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so fantastic. Thank God for knitting. Oh my goodness, what would we have done? Yeah, you would think so. I don't think anyone really picked it up over COVID that I know of. I know that knitting, we did have a charming knitting store and it closed towards the end of COVID. There was a lot going on. So I don't know if there was any new insurgence of knitters with COVID. I think Bermuda is such a business, an international business hub, especially for the reinsurance industry. And from what I understand, the reinsurance industry was really going nuts during COVID. So I would imagine that the business professionals on the island were probably pretty chained to their desks at home and stuff like that. So that might have affected any new knitters. I mean, we have a huge desktop group.
Well, before you became officially a knitwear designer, you were actually an interior designer.
Yes.
Was that like a natural transition for you? Like, did you feel like it's the same principles that apply in both?
Totally. Yeah, no, I am an interior designer, sort of, I would say by day, but to be honest, it's completely blending now. Because we work from home for both things. So I don't ever have to really leave the house except to see clients. So yes, I, picked up knitting when my son was very little. I started knitting and then I started test knitting for people. And then I kept asking questions. Well, why would your construction be like that? And then I'd always want to change it. And then I'd figure things out. And then before you know it, I'd come into a design of my own. I started knitting. The first design that I published was called the hanging leaf sweater, and it's really fun, really simple, looks amazing on any person, shape, whatever. And I found myself I knit one summer, I knit like 3 or 4 of them, and I just thought, this is such a great, easy pattern and such a great gift knit. Why not publish it? And so then off to the races. Somehow I found an amazing tech editor who I love to talk with. So it's kind of been just neat and creative, the whole process.
What was that decision for you to publish? Like, was it easy? Were you like hesitant? Were you doubting yourself at all?
Not really. It's kind of how I've done everything professionally in my life. Just kind of go forward. If there's a mistake, you can always correct it. You can always apologize to people if they're, whatever, out of if there's errors. No, it's funny. I mean, I just published another sweater yesterday, and I do on some level find publishing a pattern stressful, and I caught myself. But you can do a couple deep breaths and just carry on. And again, any mistakes can be sorted very easily. So in my mind, it's pretty low risk. The interior design world, we do a lot of big renovations and, custom, everything's custom. So I should be a lot more nervous with that, because there's a lot more potential that could go wrong. Where this, it's just design, it's just creativity.
Has there ever been like some major disasters in knitting?
Major disasters in knitting. Luckily, my tech editor is amazing. Because I think I do switch numbers around. So even for interior design and for knitting, like knitting, I have the tech editor, and interior design, I have my husband, or computer programs that'll catch your errors. So I do invert numbers. I don't remember numbers. I'm a very mathematical person, but nothing stays. So my tech editor for knitting is absolutely incredible, and she'll sort of send something back and be like, question mark, So that's great. There was one time that test knitter caught a strange gauge issue right off the bat, even before I think the other test knitters had even looked at the pattern, and that was amazing. So yeah, so no disaster per se, knock on wood.
When you design, like I noticed that you told me that like a lot of designs of yours inspired by Bermuda, by the nature of Bermuda, by all the things that surround you.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, like, give me an example of one?
Well, sure. It's funny. So yesterday we knew that there was a hurricane potentially coming, and I like to exercise on the railway trail. So yesterday morning I was sort of talking to all the trees and all the pothos vines, on the railway trail, saying like, hold tight, see you on the other side, sort of thing. So yeah, so that's the pothos tea, and that's sort of a vine motif in the raglan. Yeah, Bermuda is, because I'm Bermudian and Canadian, and I did grow up a bit in Toronto, and I'm Bermudian, so I have family and friends, so I'm very much part of the culture. But you also can sort of step back and look in too at the same time, which is really wonderful, because it's such a strange, unique, special little island with so much history. So by looking back into Bermuda from a sort of outsider perspective, you can see how wonderful and wacky and full of character Bermudians are and stuff like that. And I constantly draw on it, so there's the flora, which I just can't get enough of. So that's the pothos tea, and that goes into everything from the one shawl I've designed. You'll see a leaf motif and everything. I love the wildness, but also to our history, and at the beginning of the pandemic, it really felt like an isolated island. I mean, the closest piece of land is New York, Virginia, and that's 750 miles away. So when the world shut down and we stopped getting the commercial flights and stuff like that, you could really feel like what it was like before, World War II, when even the ships stopped coming and stuff like that, which we still had our container ship coming this time. But and that was sort of interesting. And you could kind of draw on the isolation and the historic isolation of Bermuda and how resourceful people had to be. And so that kind of came out in one of my absolute favorite sweaters called the Patience Pullover. Patience, the word patience was the ship in that the first settlers of Bermuda was Sir George Somers in 1609. And they came onto Bermuda by a hurricane.
Right.
So it's very timely. and got swept ashore. And so they had to build out of Bermuda cedar ships that would take them on. They were going to Virginia. And so the ships they built were the Patience and Deliverance. And so those ships took them to Virginia. They got to Virginia, and it was in a really bad state at the time with a lot of sickness and not good food. So ironically, the Patience brought people back to live in Bermuda because life here was a lot better. So yeah, so what we've just gone through in the last few years, Bermuda's history, the hurricane that did sweep up the first settlers for Bermuda, ironically, was the inspiration before Shakespeare's The Tempest. So that, I think, I love when history all interconnects. Like, to me, that's so amazing and so interesting. So yeah, so we have this interesting, unique piece of rock in the middle of the Atlantic, and there's a lot of special things about that can come out with your thoughts and my aspirations and how I put that into sweaters. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I'm thinking about interior design and knitting design, right? I mean, I can see the similarities because it's both creative professions, but do you ever use the same inspiration in both?
Well, interior design is very client directed, right? I mean, I'm a big believer that because we're such a small island here, I can't have interior designers in larger communities can have their own style. There can be the sort of, Kelly Worstlers who do the sort of Hollywood Regency or whatever. I can't do that here because there's only 60,000 people. So for interior design, if you're my client, I am listening to you. I am watching how you move, how you dress, what your list of requirements are. I'm taking all that and transposing that to interior design. So it's really sort of investigative, like I'm trying to grab everything that you don't even know you want to what you want, and do it as practical as we can here on this crazy little island. For knitwear design, it's more sort of in my mind, stories, feelings, things I see. Stories, feelings, things I see. I love in Bermuda, we have wonderful names of houses. So those are, or areas. So I've got a sweater coming out called the Point Shares Pullover. That's a neighborhood in Bermuda. The Cleabrig, which I published last year, that was after a wonderful house around me with wonderful people that live in the house that are very eccentric. And I sort of did a sweater with them in mind. And unfortunately, the lady of the house passed while I was knitting the sweater. And but that's Cleabrig. So it's more sort of, more creative, the knitwear design, definitely.
Well, when those ideas pop into your mind, how do you document them? Do you have some sort of like sketchbook where you sketch it?
I don't draw. I do. It turns out I'm very mathematically inclined. So it's kind of like almost like designing a kitchen. You kind of know your limitations or your structure, and you kind of work back just like a kitchen or a bathroom. So yeah, the inspiration will strike and I'll think, I just can't get enough of that leaf motif. Where can I creatively put it in? Or what season are we going into that I can wear this? And with Cleabrig, it was a little bit more unusual direction because the house is very Scottish, Bermudian, Bermuda being British influence, but it's a Scottish name. It's I always think of it as a bit of a Scottish feel. It was Christmas time, so it was wintry and cozy and everything like that. And so I could kind of feel myself wanting to knit a more sort of Nordic or Scottish inspired sweater. And why am I doing that? Because I'm thinking about our friends at Cleabrig, and and then the concerns for the friends at Cleabrig got more intense, and it just sort of all came out that way. So sometimes it's sort of with knowledge, and sometimes it's kind of after the fact, and sometimes like this sweater, the Patience, it was that crazy feeling of isolation and panic, which our generations before have definitely felt, So yeah, so it comes along, either I know what it is or it has to kind of evolve, and then I can see, this is what I was really thinking about. Like this has been in the back of my mind, niggling at me for a while.
Well,
Yeah.
talking about being mathematically inclined, how calculated are you in your design planning? Like when you think about future designs, do you think, okay, I've done sweater, I use that motif like on that shawl. Like how do you plan what's coming
Yeah,
next?
that's interesting. Okay, so what I usually do is I think about construction, I think about numbers, I think about how it can work. I don't draw so much. I try to. That my background is in fine arts, but I don't need it. I'll either plot it out either by a chart. A chart really helps me out. So a chart, there was one pattern that I did called the chevron vest that is an entirely charted project because I don't want to leave up to people, and decrease in pattern. That's confusing. So I'll chart things out. I do a lot of walking and running in particular. And I can kind of mathematically figure out how I would say if it's a motif, how I'd want it to go, or like this. I love chevrons, but then I knew I could put the increases in the spaces. So yeah, so I sort of do it backwards, I think.
Well, okay, how did you learn that? Because there's no like school of design per se. How did you learn all these techniques? How did you learn to
Well, I knit a lot. So I don't even want to there's hours on your phone that tell you how much you're on the phone. I'd be a lot more curious about how many hours you're on your needles, because I can multitask really well. So I'm always knitting. You learn things. I also like finding patterns. So I've recently found patterns in mathematics that work for increases. And I'm excited with that. And there's a really exciting project that I'm working on that's basically when I hit a eureka of how shaping is a mathematical pattern. So that's really exciting. So I like to see even numbers and pattern. I like to see patterns and like repetitive motifs. So all of that plays together, if that makes sense. Charting, I love charting. There's a website called, or a platform called Stitch Fiddle. Oh, I'm on it all the time. I find that endlessly fascinating. I also do like to go to museums a lot, or to look down a lot, or up, or at anything. I find, and so I'm saying that because I spend a lot of time at the Metropolitan Museum when I'm in New York City, and I enter off of 83rd Street. So not the big doors, but like the little tiny door on the side. And so you pop up and you're in the Greek area. So in the Greek area, if you look at the floor, all those mosaic floors are patterns, so like the circles and motifs. And I've photographed that. I can't tell you how many times, but it's just, those are the things that I like to think about. And I find that fascinating, but I can't tell you how excited I got when I found a pattern in numbers for grading. That was just like,
I mean, are you ever concerned because like you're very athletic body type, right? When you create the pattern, you know that there's going to be like all different body types, different sizes, different heights, different, like everybody is different. Are you concerned about how your sweater is going to look on somebody who has completely different body type from yours?
I totally am. I am very interested. I'm concerned, but I'm also really interested. That fascinates me. I think body shapes fascinate me. I've always been interested in fashion. Fashion interior design is not like design period is the same thing across the board. So always been interested in that. I have also had different points in my life I have digestive issues. So different points in my life, my body has changed a lot. And I really do rely on exercising just to keep it all working. And so I've kind of through my life become obsessed with what looks good on people. So I look at people a lot. Like again, in Bermuda, I'm working pretty much all the time, but when I travel, I like to look at people and how they're wearing their clothes at whatever body size they are, and how that looks good, and why does that not look good, and what's going on here, or like Vogue Knitting Live or any of the other knitting festivals. It's fascinating to walk around and really look at how those sweaters look on different people, and how the constructions, on different people. And what works across the board and what really doesn't. And, and so taking that and transposing, there's also a lot of great sizing information on the internet, whether it's, I love Sister Mountain, her sizing spreadsheets. There's also the Knitting Guild, I think out of America have some really good ones too, and others. And so I have a whole file on this sort of sizing guides, which again, I don't really hold to be too exact, but there's certain things that I do really look at and really follow by them, and then also follow my confidence and what I'm seeing. And then I also do hope that knitters have enough of their own self-knowledge to know what will be best for them. Because of course, like, the simplest thing, like sleeve length or body length, we all talk about that. And I know I'm very high-waisted. So my sweaters are usually finished body length at 12 inches, overall 21 inches. But that should absolutely not be for everyone. And so I always write knit to X inches or your desired. And so I do want other people to sort of have a basic knowledge of what they like and what they don't like. Like, I'll never do a really huge, well, never say never, right? Watch me do it the next thing. But I don't like a big neckline because I have a hump in the back of my neck that I'm really sensitive about. And it can be uncomfortable too, but I just think it's not very, I don't think my upper back is very pretty at all because of it. So I like collared shirts. I like high neck sweaters so that I can cover that. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm always thinking with that with everyone. Arms, I know my sleeves are usually on the smaller size, but I sure hope the knitters, also know what they want,
Well, when you write that pattern, who is the knitter that you have in mind? Like, how detailed are those patterns? How much information do you put in them? And is it hard to stop explaining yourself?
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I'm a big believer in too many words is too much information. And I think I have a bit of, like we were talking about before, I switch numbers around a bit. I think if you give me too much information, I switch words around, like it just becomes a big hazy mess. So I'm a big believer in brevity. When I was emailing to you, you'll see I write in point form. It's to keep me on point and to keep me on track. I really struggled in school with that. So I know that clear, good, and not too wordy instructions are what's going to really help. I also write instructions for workrooms overseas and in Bermuda, mostly overseas. So I've had 20 plus years of writing instructions experience, and trying to sort of, again, within as few words as possible, but be as specific and accurate as possible too. Also thinking that I think a lot of people have written my patterns, and I think a lot of people who are overseas workrooms for me, English might not be their first language. So I also don't want to be too complicated, too much information, because then I think, you get lost, all the information gets lost in the process. So yeah, so writing clearly is, I've had a lot of practice at it. And that's how my brain has to work. I hope that, I hope my patterns are very easy to follow. I'd love to, I think that's what I hear, but you only run into so many people that knit your patterns. So maybe at Rhinebeck I can hear more or something.
Do you remember the first time you saw somebody wearing your pattern?
Yes, it was again the hanging leaves and seeing people knit it and love it, and that really blows me away. That really, that totally knocked me for 6. Yeah, and they all looked great. So I think I hopefully I gave the right instructions.
When you see other people wearing your patterns, are you ever surprised at their like color choices or like some of the like how they change a little bit the pattern to fit them better? Like, are you
I love that. That's my favorite, because then it feels like a collaboration. And that's how I work. I love to collaborate. I like to collaborate. So again, in interior design, my contractors and subcontractors, they're so good. And so asking them what they think are, is amazing. And so same with the knitting. I just love what people come up. I'm endlessly fascinated with color combinations. I mean, I am naturally a person that likes to wear the darker shades. I like black a lot. And so now I think we're all coming out of into this sort of new enjoyment of color. And I'm completely thrilled with that and excited by that. And I love, by changing color, how different things can look. Like this Scandi Surrey sweater, or Scandi Surrey popover I designed. And I don't even recognize it in different color combinations. It's incredible. It's a whole different sweater, which I just think that's fascinating in itself. So yeah, that's amazing. And I can always learn.
Let's talk about yarn in Bermuda. Like,
Oh.
is it difficult to find? Like, where do you get it?
I'm pretty good on the computer. And when I travel, if you ever see me at the airport, you'll realize I don't travel light. So whenever I travel, I'm always looking for knitting shops. I also love to support, I love to support knitting shops too. So I know the knitting place owned by Dinah and Pam helps her out a lot. They're great supporters of mine, but I was such a fan of theirs long before that and enjoyed always shopping there. So it's a mixture of travel. I do kind of intentionally travel to places that I know have really good knitting stores. So I've done a lot of Scandinavia and other places. Luckily, my son likes knitting too, so he's never too hard done by. Yeah, and also just, having friends. Kathy at the Knot House Yarns, again, also incredible. I haven't done it recently, but in the past, especially during coronavirus, I would sort of touch base with her and sort of talk about the colors that I'm looking at, and her selection of colors for me. I mean, she kind of, we've chatted on and off over years, and she kind of knows what I'm interested in. And she'll send a photo. I know it's perfect, send it to me. Awesome. And Yan, Kwana, Doyleston, Forever Yarn, also amazing. So we have a really wonderful network of people, and I love to support, and I love to meet more, and that's really the only way you can do it from Bermuda. We don't have, and unfortunately the lovely little boutique is no longer. So, but it wasn't with the volume of knitting that I do, it wasn't enough or specific enough for anyways. But yeah, in Bermuda you really learn how to use the computer and shop that way.
Well, when you travel to yarn festivals, what's it like for you? Like, do you go there to meet people who do the same thing as you? Do you go there to look at yarn? Do you go there to take classes? Is it like
all of the above? So Vogue Knitting, historically, I have packed in as many classes as I can, because I always love to learn, and even if it's not the topic, you always learn little tips, whatever. Love it. Yep, I do shop. I shop kind of a lot, and I love to see people. Going to knitting festivals that aren't in cities, for someone who doesn't drive on the same side of the road as America and doesn't go over 50 miles an hour, and clearly is mixed up between miles and kilometers and everything. I find driving the hardest thing. So that's why I prefer to go to festivals that are in cities and stuff like that, so I can take subways and stuff like that. Rhinebeck, for me, I love to go, and I go almost every year, but I find it incredibly stressful on how to get there, because I don't want to drive, and the train is wonderful, but like I said, I don't pack light. So there's a few other, and also with Rhinebeck, is everything is so spread out. So I find that really complicated. But yeah, no, it's shopping, meeting people, buying yarn.
But when you say you don't pack light, do you bring a few extra, like empty?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so I don't usually leave the island with much, but I have the capacity to bring home a lot. But yeah, again, being on a small island, historically, we import everything. And the local retailers have done so well to bring the prices down, but it's almost impossible. So as a young person, I remember growing up or whatever, or even as in my early 20s, like having my own house, I'll always remember people would always stock up on things like toothpaste while they traveled, you know what I mean? Or Tylenol, because it was so expensive here. Now the prices here are a lot better, but you still have that mentality. So with yarn, I wouldn't say I have that mentality. I don't have a hoarding mentality, but people could definitely argue that. But the problem is with I go for a run, I get an idea, I draw it out, and then I'm itching to do it. I need to have stuff here. So even if I order online, we're still talking 3 to 4 weeks, even if I use a courier company, because it has to go through customs and it takes forever. So I do try to have a really good cross section. So even before places like Rhinebeck or Vogue Knitting or even just general travel, I'll have a quick look on Ravelry. I love Ravelry. I'm keep everything itemized in Ravelry, and I have a quick look to see what weights I'm a bit light on. What areas of my stash am I a bit light on, and I'll work on filling those out. It's a different approach.
I mean, it's not hoarding. Like I call it collecting. So like if you call it collection, then it's
Well, I think it's like a painter in their paint box or a sculptor in their, whatever different media they're working with. And I think that's it. And we just work with the media that we can't sort of, like a paint. We can mix, but we can't really mix and blend as much.
Right. Well, so what's in the works right now? Like what are you?
So right now I'm working on this big project that I'm really excited about. And basically, in a nutshell, it's a project that can be worked on by beginners or all levels of knitters. But basically, it's the idea of you find yarn that really, thrills you, and you knit a swatch, and you find the fabric that you like. So you have a basic gauge, and this design will give you. You then go backwards, and you pick your stitch gauge, and this design will then help you create the basic sweater. You can embellish it, change things, change neckline, change hemline, change whatever, but it will give you the foundation to move forward, so that you're not hemmed in by trying to force a yarn into a certain stitch gauge and vice versa, or to meet a pattern. And I'm hoping that will be really fun for people. And I'm also hoping that it'll kind of allow people to be more creative or inspired, because you think, oh, what does this yarn plus this yarn look like together? Well, that's really cool. Now I can go and just plunk it into that pattern. And they'll be each individually written out patterns. So you don't have to use more spreadsheets and maths and everything. Like it'll be, you just pick pattern B. That's my stitch gauge. Not talking at all about row gauge in any of them, because everything will be just in measurements. So,
well, you mentioned that you like taking classes at Vogue Knitting. When you come back, right, after that class, are you immediately incorporating it into your next design?
That's a good question. So I took a lot of Vogue Knitting online. So I think basically in the last 3 years, my pattern designing has increased significantly. So pre-pandemic, I can't really remember. And it was pretty early days. So I took a lot of the Vogue classes and all the other Knit City, and gosh, for the first year and a half, I did a lot. It was wonderful. I loved it. It was, bring it to my kitchen table. Couldn't be better. And I didn't have to worry about luggage and suitcase. But so I'm looking over here, and I've got all my little samples and stuff I've done in classes and stuff. And yes, I mean, some pretty amazing techniques you learn. Or not even specifically techniques, just little like bells that go off, just, oh, wow, of course, that's amazing, So I do watch a lot of podcasts too for that exact, because it's not necessarily the content, the described content of the podcast, but the little things that people don't even, that unconsciously they're information they're giving the viewer. I love that. I eat it up. So yes, I think I do. There's one I can really think about, and that's from Alex Bird. I think the Estonian knitting, the Rusamina, is fascinating. And I think I knit this before, but basically this is your floats on this side. I think I'd come up with this, and then I took the Rusamina class. And there's another sweater that's coming out that basically has that in a stand-up collar. But that's coming out soon, and that's called Big Sky. And that was directly inspired by her class. And just the idea of just thinking of things backwards, well, what's wrong with the inside? Because I mean, it is always, everyone always says, show us your floats. But sometimes the floats are so beautiful, like an abstract painting. So, I mean, I can definitely see myself exploring floats, maybe Rusamina, but the whole concept going forward. But,
I actually remember coming to Rhinebeck for the first time, and the lady in front of me had this beautiful Fair Isle mittens. And I asked her if I can see inside of her mitten, and she was, what? I just want to see the floats.
Yeah, yeah, floats are amazing. Color work is so much fun.
Is there
Floats
like
are amazing.
something in knitting that you shy away from or that intimidates you?
Um, yes, and all of a sudden I can't think of the word. I've done it so many times. Color knitting when you have it, intarsia, sorry. Um, yeah, that I did a lot of classes at Lion Brand when I was first starting, probably, back into knitting about 13, 14 years ago. And it just, I don't like all those dangly bits off of a garment. Like, I really like to knit to fun. I like to get into a fast, good rhythm. That to me is the joy of knitting. So hopefully you'll find that in my patterns, that it's just round and fun and, lighthearted. But the whole having balls of yarn and making the twist, I just couldn't be bothered. Yeah. Brioche was really hard for me at first, but I think I was doing some pretty complicated work at the time, business wise. So my brain was not open. And I always remember my dear friend was trying to teach it to me, and she could just tell like nothing was going in. So I learned a bit, and then I decided to knit Stephen West's chevron blanket. And I figure if the time I finish like a queen or king size blanket, it should be good. It was good. I'm pretty okay with brioche now.
Right.
But,
Well, brioche is only difficult the first time. Like once
yeah,
you got it, sort of. It becomes.
except for the mistakes. That's a real bummer, and tanking back and stuff. But yeah. And once you find the rhythm, again, rhythm is all that matters. Yeah.
Would you design this brioche?
Probably not. I don't think I do enough to really. I don't look. I love knitting off of people's patterns, so I see that as treating myself. And I had a little time yesterday to figure out what my next treat was. I don't gravitate to a lot of the brioche. I don't knit a lot of shawls. I have a drawer full of shawls. I don't knit a lot of shawls. I think the problem is I get really inspired by color, and then nothing really matches my wardrobe. So I've got a drawer full of shawls. And I think shawls are a great way to do brioche. Would I do it in a sweater? Probably not.
Well, if somebody like 100 years from now wrote a book about Bermuda and mentioned the knitting culture there, what pattern of yours would you want to be mentioned there?
That's a good question. I probably the Bermuda roofline was one, because that is so close to our architecture. And that's just gosh, I wrote that so long ago. I knit it 3 or 4 times, so it's amazing that I would forget any detail of it. But that's just all ribbing. I like playing with ribbing. Hamilton, yeah. But and directional knitting. But yeah, the Bermuda roofline, I think, for Bermuda, the history of Bermuda, maybe the patient sweater again. I gotta knit a couple more of those. Just I would love people to revisit that design. I love the motif in it, and I'm thinking of how I could use it elsewhere in other sweaters, because I just think it was so special. It was sort of a bit David Bowie, a bit a bit rock and roll, and a bit traditional sort of Nordic English culture. I love that motif, and that to me is very much Bermuda. But yeah, I don't know. Good question. Oh.
When you knit for yourself, like for your pleasure, do you find that you want to knit something new, or do you like coming back to the old patterns because it's like an old friend kind of thing?
Oh, always new. I want to learn more. So yeah, always new. It has to be not too incredibly complicated, because I also have to enjoy it. I don't want to like hurt my head. Yeah, so I saw your Shetland lace video, and I thought, that's really nice. I'm not going to do
Well, the thing is about Shetland lace, what I like is that you can take a little motif of it and you can turn it into a scarf. It doesn't have to be something like that.
Yeah, that's
It
stunning.
doesn't have to be a year-long project. And I actually have done it with fingering weight yarn, where my mom would be like, I just want like a little scarf. And I would take like a little diagram from Shetland lace and make it with fingering weight. And suddenly it's like this gorgeous thing, and it's super easy. So
that's fantastic.
yeah, it doesn't have to be superbly complicated.
Yeah, and that's what, especially when you were showing the cobweb and stuff like that. So that but that's not a no, a hard no. Yeah, very amazing. Very. I hope you do more about your knitting too, because I always look at the what's behind you. So yeah, yeah.
That's funny because I'm in the middle of thinking about the future of my channel.
Oh,
And I'm actually wondering, and you guys can tell us what you think.
yeah.
If I should put more about my knitting, if I should put more about like things I'm working on, or if it should be, because when I started, the idea of the channel was to create this library of talent, of fiber talent, and to just so anybody who comes to my channel can look through the playlist and pick something that sounds interesting and like find, like picking a book in the library.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I
now,
think you could do so many neat offshoots. And I think the current one that you're doing, I love your review of the lace books. I mean, I've bought a few, okay, gotta read those. I love that was a really interesting tangent, and I think people definitely want to know more. And also, I'd love to know more about how you got into knitting. A dear friend of mine on the island is Czech, and she follows a lot of Russian knitters online, and that's a whole nother league. I mean, that's amazing. So, I'd love to know more about that. And you could do adjuncts, and I think you're, we all just want to know everyone's what people are interested in. I'm always endlessly curious how we get to where we are at the present day. So, like, how, Irina, are you where you are with your knitting and your channel? You know what I mean? Like, that to me is endlessly interesting. So I think you would have
before we talk about me, let's
sorry.
you. How did you learn how to knit? Like, tell me that story.
Oh, that's a really funny story. So I grew up in Toronto, and down the street was a family with 7 kids, and they had a cottage up north, and we would all kind of fit. It was a huge cottage. And so there's always tons of kids, and I was sort of called the 8th child, and then there would be parents, and it's just a real fun cottage. But the lady of the house, you could tell by after lunch, she was done. She was done, and all these kids everywhere, and we were all into like playing with snakes and turtles, and she just wanted quiet. So she would give us all balls of yarn and knitting needles and say, knit a square, knit a square. So on the front porch in the summer, we would sit for about an hour after lunch that Nancy could either have a snooze or just quiet. And we'd knit these squares. I never saw a blanket, didn't really care. I'm sure it was all pulled out after we left, but it was a great way to learn. And I remember being at Vogue knitting one of probably it was a while ago. Anyways, and Mrs. Seidel passed away, and I wrote a note to her husband just to say it's really so sad, but it's neat that I'm here in New York, and it's all learning and studying and engrossing myself in this crazy world, and it's all because of Mrs. Seidel. That said, my mother was a knitter too, and really quick, another really funny story is she's very creative, but she was a lawyer, so her creativity only had sort of finite time. And we did a lot of road trips. And so I'll always remember sitting in the car, and she could read and knit in the car, which I could never do because of nausea. And she was sitting in the front seat, and she was doing this complicated cable sweater. And she was also supposed to be giving my dad directions with the map, before phones. And so my dad said something about, I think, the directions, and my mother said, oh, we've got to go back to Aurelia. And what she was saying in her head is she's got to pull out back to where she was when we were going through Aurelia. But my dad took it as, oh, we've got to turn around and go back physically to Aurelia. So now the joke is like, if you have to rip out your knitting or whatever, it's back to Aurelia. But anyways.
And I love that. Like, this is like a family heirloom story,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so when you knit now, like back when that blanket never happened and you didn't care because you enjoyed the process, right? What about now?
Oh, that blanket happened. That's on the bed, and my husband's going to be buried with that stupid blanket. But don't pull anything because it might all unravel.
But like when you knit now, is it more about the joy of knitting or the final product?
That's another really good question. I think I'm more of a product knitter, but it's because I'm really I'm a person that likes to check off boxes. So I'm very, I'm very detailed. So, and I don't need any more sweaters. So, but I like to learn. And so the excitement of learning, and whether it's learning like why those colors look good together or why that motif is more pleasant to your eye than the motif I did the last time, so it's more in the pleasure of learning, but I do need to tick off. I always have goals. So by the end of today, I need to get to this point.
Right.
But I do that with work too. By the end of the day, I've got to fill these 5 tasks, otherwise keep at it. So.
Well, you mentioned that you don't need another sweater. So I was interviewing a while ago, Susanna De Rosa, and she spent like almost a decade or maybe even more, like don't quote me on the exact timing, but a long time swatching Shetland lace.
Yeah. Could I do it? Couldn't dream of that. That's amazing.
She has like a wall of like little swatches of different Shetland lace designs, right? And motifs. And I asked her, I was like, you know how many shawls you could have done with that amount of time, right? Why would you spend all this time doing swatches? And she said, well, I don't need another shawl and neither do my daughters. So it's like, it's something that's interesting for me and I'm learning and I'm researching. So to me, it's fine, right? It's not a waste of time. It's something I'm doing. Do you find like, because you don't need any more sweaters, do you approach every next project as like just a learning opportunity?
I think I do. But I don't think I could knit all those swatches, although I can completely 100% absolutely understand where she's coming from. Maybe if I knew at the end of the day I was writing a comparative book or the history of, or the, how it works, then I could in my head quantify where you're going with that. And I'm sorry, I didn't watch that one episode, but so maybe she did write a book, and then so of course you have an end goal. I'm very goal oriented. Yeah, that could definitely, and I'd love to say I like to give my sweaters away or socks away that I knit, whatever. And, the endless conversation of knitworthy, and knitworthy is also so tricky because a lot of people receive them and they don't want them. So my mother always likes my sweaters. My husband, sometimes, he's very specific. My son doesn't want them at all. So yeah, so I have closets of sweaters, and that is kind of bothering me a bit. And I would love to give, I have a friend that really eyed this one up, that's in the publication page. And I'm hoping to give this one to her for Christmas. She's not going to watch a knitting podcast, so I don't think I've given away a big secret. But when you come across someone that really can appreciate and really loves it, then I'd happily give away more because it's getting ridiculous. And maybe I should just practice swatches to write a book, but I need a goal.
Well, do you think like out of all the designs that you created so far, do you think you created that one masterpiece that people are going to remember you by, or do you think it's still ahead of you?
Yeah, no, not even close. Because honestly, when I look back, and I've got about 5 patterns that I've got tech edited and ready to be published. I look, and I put them to bed for the summer, and I'm looking at them now. I'm like, pass. But it's the self-critic, right? When you've, so no, and I think that I hope I never think that there's like the masterpiece. I hope I never, because then you're like, because then why bother continue? Just, I'm interested. Balance, proportion, pattern, fit, drape. I can't get enough of it.
Right. Well, I loved getting to know you and getting a peek into your design process and your thinking about it. So
the mental chaos.
I mean, that's what makes it wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you for being my guest today. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, it was so much fun chatting with you. You asked great questions and make me feel very at ease. So I really appreciate it and really enjoyed my time. Thank you.
Thank you.